Hello, my name is India, and today I'm here to talk to you about my favorite books that I read in 2017. Let's start out with some honorable mentions. My favorite poetry books that I read this year were Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankine, Even This Page is White by Vivek Shraya, and We Women by Edith Sondergren, translated from the Swedish and the German by Samuel Charters. I read each of these poetry collections within a week over Thanksgiving break, and they all were really fascinating. The first two talk about racism in different ways and in different forms, and then this last one is a work of feminist poetry and also some sad poetry as well by a poet who died in the 20s. My favorite middle grade book that I read this year was The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherine M. Valente. This follows a young girl who gets swept away and taken to Fairyland, and this plays with the tropes of those stories about children who are taken away to a magical world. My favorite memoir that I read this year was Fun Home, a tragicomic by Alison Bechdel. This is a graphic memoir, and it follows Alison Bechdell's relationship with her father after he died and during his lifetime, and also her relationship with her family as she goes off to college and realizes that she's gay. My favorite reread of the year was Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This is about Mrs. Dalloway, who is preparing to have a party. I absolutely adore Virginia Woolf's writing. Her writing just clicks with me. I reread Mrs. Dalloway for an English class that I was in. My favorite play or short story collection that I read this year was Angels in America, a Gay Fantasia on National Themes by Tony Kushner. This follows a number of characters in New York in the 80s. During the AIDS epidemic, and discusses themes such as religion, race, illness, mental health, homophobia. Yeah, it was really powerful. My favorite historical fiction that I read this year was All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is a dual narrative. One part follows a girl who's blind, and a young girl who is blind and lives with her father in France. And the other follows a young orphan boy who develops a knack for mathematics and mechanics. It's set during World War II, and this book is just so atmospheric and so fantastic. I absolutely adore Anthony Doerr. He's one of my favorite living authors, and this was the last book of his that I have to read, and I'm a little perplexed about how to feel about that. My favorite YA book that I read this year was We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. This is about Marin, who kind of runs away from home when she leaves for college. She's from California, but she goes to school on the East Coast, I think in Massachusetts. Anyway, and it deals with young people struggling with grief and isolation, and this book takes place while during the first week of her winter break while she's at school rather than going home. My favorite fantasy or non-realistic book that I read this year was The Gracekeepers by Kirsty Logan. This is kind of fantasy. It's set in a world similar to our own, but one that is almost completely covered in water and does have some fantastical elements to it. This follows our two main characters, North and Callanish. North is a bear trainer on a circus ship, and Callanish is living alone on an island. And this book was really intriguing in the way that it discusses themes like grief and home and the relationships that you have with people and what you care about. I really enjoyed it. Now, on to my 3 favorite books of the year. These are the top favorites, so they kind of escape the categories that the other books that I just discussed are set in. The first one that I want to talk about is Cassandra by Florence Nightingale. This is an angry outcry against the forced idleness of Victorian women. This is a little essay manifesto about the situation that women were in the Victorian period, the long list of things that they were not allowed to do, and the boredom that plagued their lives. I found this to be incredibly intriguing. I ended up writing an essay on this, and I would highly recommend everyone to read this, especially if you're interested in early feminist works. Another book that I absolutely loved reading this year was Bluets or Bluets by Maggie Nelson. This is a book that escapes categorization. It's a memoir, but also it's a prose poetry collection. This follows Maggie Nelson understanding and making sense of her own grief and emotions tied to heartbreak and loss, and also a philosophical view of her obsession with the color blue and things that are blue. I found the way that this was written incredibly amazing. It's written in short little vignettes, and just was really fascinating to read, and I absolutely loved it. I also wrote an essay on this, hence why it's all marked up. My absolute favorite book that I read this year was She of the Mountains by Vivek Shraya. This is sort of a dual narrative. The main narrative in this book is about a boy in Canada who's realizing his sexuality, and also who's kind of understanding his identity and place in the world as a person of color. But also there's a second element of this book that follows the Hindu gods Parvati and Shiva and Ganesh. This book also has beautiful illustrations in it that go along with both narratives. One of the things that I absolutely loved about this book, and that took me off guard and absolutely fascinated me, was that this discussed not only bisexuality and someone realizing that they're attracted to more than one gender, but also biphobia, not only in itself, but also the biphobia that we see in the LGBT community. And I found that it was amazing to read about that in a book, because that is something that exists in the world today. Thank you for joining me for this video and watching it. I hope you read some amazing books in 2017. Be sure to let me know what your favorites were, and I'll see you in another video.